Film will always be my first love. I love it. I love writing for film. However, as a writer, it is not satisfying because you have always the budget in your head. Every sentence you write, you have the budget in your head and think, how much will this cost? I could never write science fiction. And the only way to really do that and have the really big concept, stories and ideas is by writing novels. And actually, I never looked back because the freedom I have with my creativity is worth everything else.
Do you love science fiction and fantasy books? You found yourself in the right dimension. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse, where each week I talk to science fiction and fantasy authors about myth, magic, and the infinite possibilities of storytelling. I'm your host, Herman Stuernagel, and I will be taking you on a journey with some of your favorite authors, helping you to get to know them and possibly uncover some new literary gems along the way. Ready to explore? Because on this show, every conversation is a doorway into a different world. Welcome to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. This is episode 8. I'm happy you could join me. Today my guest is Anna Mocikat, and as you will hear, Anna has been writing for most of her adult life, and she has really built a niche for herself in the subgenre of cyberpunk. Today we'll discuss her history of writing for film, how books, films, and games have influenced her work, as well as we will take a bit of a deep dive into her most latest book, Spacepunks. We really have a great discussion, so I hope you'll stick around for that. I don't have much of a personal update for you this week. Chimera is off to advanced readers, and I'm waiting to get edits back for book 3 in that same series, Resurgence. I'm doing a few final tidy-ups and proofread of Chimera in order to get it ready for publication in a few weeks, which I cannot believe that we are less than a month away from the release of Chimera. And that's it for me for a personal update. The book of the week this week is Wistful Ascending by J.C.M. Byrne. I'm going to have the author of this book on next month, so I'm not going to tell you too much about it other than it's a superhero book that's set in space. It is a lot of fun. I had a great time with this book, and it wasn't at all what I expected. So please do hit that subscribe button so that you can hear that interview with J.C.M. Byrne next month, and you don't want to miss that one. Which also reminds me that if you haven't already, please subscribe to this channel on YouTube and hit that like button. I know you hear it on every channel that you listen to, but it really does help others find my channel, which is so important as I'm still just getting started with this podcast, and I really would like to reach out to more readers. All right, that's all for me personally. I'm going to read Anna's bio and then we'll get started with the interview. Anna Mocikat is an award-winning, internationally published author of Behind Blue Eyes, Spacepunks, Shadow City, Cyber Squad, and more. Her Behind Blue Eyes series is one of the most popular contemporary cyberpunk book series. Before becoming a novelist, she graduated from film school and worked as a screenwriter and game writer for over a decade. Anna Mocikat may or may not be a cyborg. All right, so welcome back to the greatest podcast in the multiverse. I am so excited to have Anna Mocikat here with me today. Welcome here, Anna.
Thank you for inviting me. I'm really excited.
I'm excited too. This is going to be a fun chat. Can you start by telling us a little bit about your writing journey and what brought you to this point in your author career?
So I'm probably one of the few people who have been a writer or a professional writer all their adult life. So I've done not much more than that all my life. I used to work in the film industry. I am a screenwriter by education, so that's what I did for a decade, and that's why I basically learned my craft. Later on, I worked in the video games industry as a game writer, and then as you can hear, I am not from here. I am from Europe, so I used to live in Germany. I was published there by a big publisher, and that's where I became like a novelist full time. And now here I have decided to go the indie way.
Okay, wonderful. So what caused the transition from developing or writing for video games and being in the film industry? How did you go from that into writing full time?
Film will always be my first love. I love it. I love writing for film. I also directed short films and commercials and did stuff like that. So I love the magic about film. That's like what I love most about it, the craft. However, as a writer, it is not satisfying, in my opinion, because you have always the budget in your head when you write something. Every sentence you write, you have the budget in your head and think, how much will this cost? And will it be possible to realize for the budget I can have? And especially in Germany, where the industry is much smaller than here, this is a huge problem. So it was never satisfying. I could never write science fiction. I used to write horror back then, which is also cool, but I always wanted to do science fiction. And the only way to really do that and have the really big concept stories and ideas is by writing novels. So that's why eventually I came to this writing, and actually I never looked back because the freedom I have with my creativity is worth everything else.
So, what's the why in your writing? What's the motivation for your storytelling? What drew you into novel writing?
So most of all, I really want to entertain people and have them a good time. Yeah, that's probably the most important thing for me. I'm not in this for getting awards and being read by 0.1% of people and nobody else understands it. I really want to write science fiction on a high level, but still entertaining. That's like my goal, and that's what I'm doing. And yeah, I always was a writer, so it always was this thing for me. I always was creative all my professional life.
Yeah, and you have a number of books under your belt so far, and it looks like you're succeeding in entertaining people, which is wonderful. Um,
I thank
so,
you.
so what does your writing process look like? How do you approach a new story as you're about to write it?
So, unfortunately, I'm not one of those people who can just churn out a book a month, like 100,000 words. There are people like that. I am not like that. It takes me a long time to develop a story and characters and a world. I think, especially world building in science fiction, is really, if you do it right, it's really complicated. So I spend a lot of time on that. And I mean, you write also space opera, so you know how much work that is, how many details and everything, and how much research goes into that. I always try to have it as close to science as possible. Of course, it's still fiction, so if we stuck to physics 100%, it would be boring. So we need to take some liberties, but at least to make it plausible. So that requires tons of research, at least for me, because I'm no physicist. And so for me, like for space punks, it took me almost a year to from the first idea, the first spark in my head, to when I actually started writing the book. And then the writing took me another 4 months. When the world is already established, like in a series that I already have, it's of course much easier than I usually write a book in 3 months.
Okay, so you spent a year planning for the book and then 4 months to actually write it. Is that
Yeah. I mean, I published a couple of books in the meantime and wrote them,
right?
but like, I spent really a lot of time when I had the time to think about it and develop it, and the world especially. The
Yeah.
characters come usually relatively easy to me, but yeah, the world took a lot of work.
Right? Yeah, you're developing a full world. So you're if you're trying to establish the details and the intricacies of the world, it takes a lot of time to make sure that you develop something that you can remain consistent with, especially if you're building a series in the same world.
Yeah, yeah, especially.
Yeah.
And then you sometimes have, a lore of a couple hundred years or something like that, and things happen in the past and you want them, you maybe they happened in the past, they are like backstory, but they need to be consistent, they need to make sense. I hate nothing more than like when you have series and suddenly something jumps out of the closet that was never there, and okay, the author just put it there because he needed a story, or wanted it to go that way, but it was never planned like that. So this is something I think most people don't notice it, but as a writer I notice it immediately. okay, this wasn't there, and you put it there later on. And this is something I try to avoid, and I do that by really do the all the work in advance, and try to be as precise as possible. Because there are also, it's not often, but some readers will contact me and will ask super detailed questions, like really, like on Instagram. I had it not long ago. A guy has started asking me questions about Behind Blue Eyes, and like the backstory, and what did Nephilim's father do in this year, and so on and so on. And actually, I could answer all those questions because I know it, but yeah, it happens. Sometimes readers want to know really everything.
Yeah, right. So it's, I mean, it's great that you have all those details planned out ahead of time so that you're able to, respond to those questions, because those reader questions do come, and it's sometimes surprising that the amount of detail they want to know.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it would be pretty embarrassing if you say, "Oh, I have no idea," I forgot.
Right. Yeah. I guess it depends on the probably depends on the question a little bit as well. But so how where does your inspiration for your stories come from then?
I don't really know. It's just comes. I am fortunate. I never get a writer's block or anything like that. I just have plenty of ideas, and
Mhm.
so I don't need a muse. I'm my
Right.
own muse, so it's difficult to tell. From the void, from the white noise.
Hmm. Yeah. No, I can definitely relate to that. Sometimes I'll hear a lyric of a song and it'll inspire an entire series. Something
Yeah,
like that can
exactly. Yeah,
be
that's
your brain just takes it and runs with it, or the muse, as you say. So yeah, I definitely understand that. How about other authors? What authors have inspired your writing?
so. When I was young, I read a lot of classics. Like Isaac Asimov is probably one of the biggest influences on me. I also read a lot of Stephen King. I wrote, of course, Philip K. Dick, and George Orwell is one of my all-time favorites. So yeah, I read all those books when I was a teen. Like when other girls were reading uh, teenage romance novels, I was like reading about spaceships and robots, and obviously the other girls thought I'm weird, but whatever. It's a long time ago.
And you took it and ran with it. So you did well with that.
Yeah, well, that's just how it is. I still don't like romance novels. Okay, so
No.
for my cyberpunk books, I've been inspired very much by Ghost in a Shell. That's okay, not a book, but a movie, which was like for me very very important. And later on, for by Richard Morgan's books. So yeah, he inspired me a lot to write. To bring in all those grittiness and violence and sex in the books, because that's what he does. And science fiction is very often a little bit sterile, like from Star Trek, for example. It's so sterile you could eat off the floor. So I wanted to make it a little bit more adult, and that's what he does in his books, and that's what I also do in my books. And I saw, okay, it works well from him for him, so why not?
Yeah, right. So you have a few books out currently. How many books do you have total?
Okay, so book number 14 in English will release in September, but I also have four books I published in Germany before I came here, and I have four German translations of my books. So, but let's say, to make it easy, it's 14.
14. Yes. Okay, good. Good. And you're, probably the most popular one, or the one that I've seen the most, at least online, is Behind Blue Eyes. It looks like that series has quite a following. But you've recently started a new series called Space Punks. Can you tell me a little bit more about that book and what's it all about?
So, Spacepunks is a space opera, but it's also very much cyberpunk. And since I am deeply into the cyberpunk genre, I thought that would actually make sense for me. So it's basically a blend of those two genres. It is set in space, it is set in the future, it is set on a spaceship most of the time, but it has plenty of elements which are very typical for cyberpunk. So you have like the mega corporations and cyborgs and augmentations and so on. So all of this, but in space.
Okay. Yeah, can we delve a little bit more into cyberpunk? What, just for listeners who might not be familiar with the genre, what exactly is cyberpunk?
Oh, that's a good question. That's like I will try to make it really easy because and quick because we don't have time for a scientific discourse of a cyberpunk. We have arguments about that like every day in the cyberpunk groups on Facebook where people discuss what is really cyberpunk and what is not. I see it relatively broadly. I'm not one of the gatekeepers. I think a cyberpunk is a science fiction subgenre. This is the most important thing about it because some people think it has to do with punk movement or something like that. No, it's really just the name. It's a science fiction subgenre. It's fictional genre, but it is darker and grittier than most science fiction, and it's usually set in an urban environment with big cities and all kinds of shady stuff going on in between the canyons of the huge skyscrapers and so on. So if you think of Blade Runner, of the aesthetics of Blade Runner, so this is like the ultimate cyberpunk movie.
Yeah, I think that's probably what most people are familiar with when they think of cyberpunk, if they know what cyberpunk is at all. What are some other cyberpunk books or movies that people might be familiar with that are popular in the genre?
Um, so one of the problems we have in the genre is that there are actually not many really popular books. So we have William Gibson, who is like the biggest name in the genre, but I mean he was big 30 years ago, and therefore the books are really old. So some of them have aged better than others, but it's really old. It's like it's like reading Isaac Asimov. It's cool, but it's not really up to date anymore. So this is like the big name we have in a genre, and other than that, yeah, we have later on Richard Morgan, but other than that, there are not many successful authors out there who write cyberpunk. It's a very difficult genre to establish yourself in. And when it comes to movies, it's much stronger, and video games. That's of course the strongest thing with Cyberpunk 2077 with Deus Ex and other games which have been around for a while. So, but of course, Cyberpunk 2077 is the most prominent one. I played it like 200 hours and I love it. And so in video games, Cyberpunk is pretty popular. Movies, so we have a little bit of TV, but books is like pretty much of a no man's land.
Right, right. Yeah, no, and that's kind of what I expected as well, because you do see it a lot in video games and somewhat in movies as well. So I was just wondering what because it's not a genre that I've read extensively. So it's good to know kind of your take on that. And as far as Cyberpunk 2077 goes, I play actually that game actually got me through COVID. I got COVID kind of the week that it came out, and I had nothing else to do, so I downloaded that game and it kept me busy. I had some friends playing as well, so it got me through being sick.
So you enjoyed it despite COVID?
I did. Yeah, I you know what? It was a great distraction for me, and I logged a lot of hours in that game as well,
Yeah, I love it.
despite
It's a
despite some of
wonderful
the
game.
bugs it might have had.
So I didn't have any issues with it. Funny enough, I never had any issues with it. I played it on an old Xbox One, and I never had any bugs. So I was lucky. I could just enjoy it and play it, and it was really wonderful. So yeah, for a cyberpunk fan like me, this game, of course, was like uh, the fulfillment
Good.
of my dreams.
Right. Yeah, I really enjoy. I really did enjoy the game. I had a few bugs, and I was playing on a PS4, so I was on an older console, and I still didn't have a lot of the issues some people were having. There were a few bugs, but it wasn't enough to detract from the enjoyment of it. So I still had fun with it.
PlayStation usually has more issues than Xbox. It's like from a game developer's view, PlayStation is a pain in the ass to develop on. So it was absolutely no surprising that the PlayStation players had much more problems with the game than the Xbox players.
Yeah, yeah, and it was just a a bigger game I think than the older generation models could handle too. I think was the bigger problem with it.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it was insane that they did it for old and next gen consoles. That was the problem. They shouldn't have done it. It was too ambitious. But thankfully,
Yeah,
because it was COVID. I certainly didn't have the money to buy myself a
no,
new Xbox. So I'm happy I could play it on my Xbox One.
yeah, I am happy as well about that. So tell me a little bit more about Space Punks. What's the basic plot line for it?
So it starts out with David, who is a young man, and he ends up in a high security prison on the Martian moon Deimos. And he remembers who he is, but he doesn't remember how he got there. He got a blow to his head, and his biochip in his head fried, and so everything is scrambled in his mind. So he is there, and he wonders how he got there because the worst people in the solar system are put in this prison, and there he is, and he thinks he's a good guy. So this is like how the story starts. Luckily for him, he meets Aztec in jail, who is like a purple-haired a cyborg chick, and she's pretty badass. The first thing she does, she beats up a group of thugs in the shower naked, and that's how she's introduced. And luckily for him, she takes him along on a jailbreak because she has been hired to actually bring someone out of this jail who is there. So this is a huge reference to Escape from New York, actually, which is one of my favorite movies. And this is basically the story of it. So she's there in this jail to get someone out, and he happens to be there, and she takes him along, says, "Okay, I need help with that, and you seem to be the right guy for that." And then that's how he ends up on a spaceship with her and her friends, who turn out to be the coolest mercenary group in the galaxy, and that's how his adventures start. And yeah, there are also there are mechs, and there are robots and cyborgs and spaceship battles and more robots. Uh, so there was a war 100 years ago that almost destroyed humanity. That's like the backstory of it. 100 years ago, AI rose against humans and tried to destroy them, like in Terminator, basically. And humans won by really that much. And so now any kind of artificial intelligence and robots are completely banned. So humans have to do everything themselves again. And that's where the cyborgs come into place, because you can connect human brain with a computer and then basically have them do stuff they couldn't do otherwise, like navigate spaceships and so on. And that's basically the story. So of course, some of the killer robots have survived, and we will meet them over the story. But that's not actually the main story. The main story is something different.
Right. Yeah, that's such an interesting premise, and I have started reading. I actually have started reading Space Punks. I haven't gotten through the entire book yet, but the premise is so interesting to me.
Thank you. I'm glad. I'm glad you think so.
Yeah, yeah, you're very welcome. How did you take elements of cyberpunk and integrate them into space opera? Was that a difficult thing to do?
At this point, I'm so much into cyberpunk. I mean, I have three cyberpunk series. One is finished, two are ongoing. So I'm so deeply into this whole matter. So bringing in cyberpunk elements was very easy. That was the easiest part of it, actually. And I have a thing for cyborgs. I really like cyborgs. So they always have fascinated me, and so of course there are cyborgs in my book, and they're pretty cool and they're pretty sexy because they always are. And I so for me, what I the idea was why I brought this whole thing with the war with the AI and everything, because a lot of space operas, which I really love, forget about artificial intelligence, or maybe they don't forget, they just leave it out intentionally because it's such a huge topic. Like for example, The Expanse. I love it. It's a huge inspiration. Was also a huge inspiration for Spacebunk's wonderful series. But why is there no AI? Why are there no robots? Why are there no supercomputers? I mean, they shouldn't. Alex is a fantastic character, but he shouldn't be there. A computer should be doing his job, because definitely a computer would be a better pilot than him. And
Right.
so that's for me always the question: why is that so? Why is everything so analog when we are now in the year 2023, and we already have such incredible artificial intelligence and computer systems right now. So if we imagine how it would be in 100 years, if we're still there, I mean, maybe we will have the Terminator scenario, but if we're still there, it's absolutely implausible that humans will do anything themselves in space. And so that was why I developed this backstory. So actually, an artificial intelligence is completely banned. It's not allowed to have them, build them, or use them in any way. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, and absolutely. When we look at how fast artificial intelligence seems to be progressing now, it's definitely a question that I think looking into any sort of futuristic writing needs to be at least something that's addressed.
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, yeah, some don't do it, and that's okay. But for me, it's always something that bugs me in the back of my head that I ask myself.
Right. So is there artificial intelligence present in your book without giving any spoilers away? Does it come into to play, or is it just something that's part of the backstory?
Oh, no, 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 no. It's actually very, very important for the story. But I can't tell you because maybe you will read the book till the end, and maybe you will be actually
Mhm.
surprised that there is much more of them around than people think.
Okay.
Yes, but I can't tell you anything about that. So let's keep it that way.
Yeah.
They were basically extinguished 100 years ago, and so there is no artificial intelligence left in this world.
Excellent. Yeah. No spoilers necessary. So what was the most difficult part for you then, developing this space opera world to kind of, develop your cyberpunk characters and technologies into?
For me, it was really physics. I mean, I always have been a big physics fan, so I like researching stuff like that, and I already had probably a bigger than average knowledge about physics and astrophysics before I started, but as there was still so much to learn to make it plausible, because space is a horrible place. It's so scary. I mean, you can't, just for example, so you can't, you probably know it. I mean, you did a lot of space research yourself. So you would only survive 10 to 15 seconds in space without a spacesuit. So this is something we see very often in science fiction movies and books. Someone is floating to space for a couple of minutes and then they get saved, and because they were holding their breath, and that's 100% death. No chance, no chance to survive that. So I have a spacewalk without a spacesuit right at the beginning of the book, and so that's where I thought of a possibility how to make that at least halfway plausible. And then there is gravity, which is like, gravity is a bitch. I mean, oh my God, gravity in space. If we really take physics and we really would be very, very strict about physics, 99% of all science fiction books wouldn't make sense movies, right? I mean, that's just how it is. So you have to make the decision for yourself how deeply you really go into science, how strict you keep to it. Because if you would, as I said earlier, if you would stick to it 100%, the book will turn out pretty boring, because physics is really difficult, and especially gravity will make things super difficult. I mean, we have different gravity
Yeah.
on every planet in our solar system. You can't just walk around on one planet and then fly to another one and walk around there with no problem. That's even if we say we have like something on spaceships that creates fake gravity, like in Star Trek. Even then, just going down on planets and then to another one, that's not how it works. So those are the things I put so much thought into it and try to make them at least plausible. But there will always be some smart ass who will give me a bad review and say, okay, yeah, this is not accurate. Okay, no, 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 this is not
Yeah,
accurate, or something like that. There will always be
yeah.
at least one guy.
Right. And that's the hard thing I find with writing science fiction. I find this as well is that you can't please everybody. You're either it's either too heavy in the sci-fi or it's not heavy enough, and there's some technical thing that you didn't include or you didn't get right. But I mean, gravity is that tough one because you do have to do a bit of hand waving, or at least I did in my series. Yeah, they have artificial gravity, and not you know either you don't include somebody who can explain it very well, but it just works, or you do have some sort of explanation that's kind of based in reality, but you're right. That was one of the things I tried to grapple with as well in my books. Okay, I wanted to make it somewhat realistic as well because it's set in our solar system, kind of a couple hundred years in the future. But how did they deal with artificial gravity, with bases on the moon and that sort of thing, where the gravity would be a third of what we have here?
Yeah, yeah,
Um,
exactly. And I also have like in space punks, the people. So Mars and everything Martian is the standard because Earth isn't there anymore because of the war. So Mars is like the human stronghold number one. So everything on Mars is the normal thing. And on Mars, the gravity is one third of what we have on Earth, and which is also on Venus. So if you imagine someone who grew up there, and they also have the same gravity on all spaceships, because yeah, it's like standard, also Martian standard time and everything. But if you imagine you grew up on Mars and then you go to Venus, how would you feel? That would feel horrible. It would be as if you would suddenly weigh 3 times as much as you do now. And so this is like a scene where the captain goes on on Venus, and he can hardly walk because and he breaks out in sweat and everything, and he's like, oh my god, and the cyborgs are like, what's going on? You should work out more. And because yeah, for them it's of course a no big deal to carry a little bit more, but for a human that would be really really awful to do.
yeah,
And then on the other
yeah,
hand, you go on Ceres and you will bounce off the surface if you jump. So that's the kind of thing. But back to artificial gravity, I don't know how you resolved it, but for me, I gave a very, very brief explanation about it and didn't go into detail because you can only lose when you try to do that because obviously, according to physics, it's something not possible. Uh, but I assumed, okay, from Star Trek and basically all major science fiction franchises, we're so used to that, so people shouldn't
yeah,
be bothered by it. But promptly, I got a review where someone complained that there is artificial gravity in the book. So yeah, okay.
yeah.
In Star Trek, it's obviously okay, but when I do it, it's not. So, as you said before, you can never do it right. You can only lose because there will be people who will nitpick little things, and either it's too hard sci-fi or not sci-fi enough.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I've definitely seen that. So you can't. I mean, you can't let those those nitpickers detract you too much from. You just kind of have to pick a route and stick with it, and
Yeah,
that's
exactly.
where it ends up is where it is. So, mhm. What was so what was the most interesting thing that you learned during your research through this? Was there something that really jumped out at you that either whether you included it in the book or not that surprised you?
A lot of stuff actually. So like that you really die after 10 seconds in space. That was surprising. I because of watching science fiction, I assumed you have a little bit of a chance, but you really do not.
No.
What I also find very interesting is that it can be very, very cold. So you will basically freeze solid if you don't have a suit. But it can also be very hot, so you melt. It depends on where you are, where the sun stands, And if you're in a direct sunlight in space, it will become very hot. So you will basically cook in your spacesuit if you're at the wrong place. And another place you will freeze solid. And so this is something that totally surprised me because I was always thinking space is cold. So wherever you are, it's cold. But it's not. It can be very hot and not just directly next to the sun. And of course, the further you go away, the colder it gets. That's why we have the ice giants and so on. But yeah, this was probably the most stunning thing for me because I had no idea. But of course, if you think about it, it makes sense.
Do you have a favorite character in Space Punks? One that was your favorite to write, and what made them special?
Yes, so that would be Nightingale. He is a cyborg mercenary, and he is very full of himself and very. He drives his captain crazy with his snarky, sarcastic remarks, and he's vain and arrogant, but he's still someone that most readers really, really like. And it was great fun to write him because he has like really the best lines in the books because he just gives a damn, you know. He would just tell you right away in your face whatever he thinks. That's very funny when you read such a character, but I think being around him, he would drive me crazy. That for sure, and probably most people. But that's the wonderful thing with fictional characters that you can write them in a way they couldn't sustain in real life. And the interesting thing about him is because you mentioned before how do the ideas come and so on. So actually, he was at the beginning he was way much of a side character when I started writing the book. But the moment he appeared for the first time, and I wrote the first scene with him, I knew, okay, this is like that he will steal the show from all other characters. It was like I had never thought about that. I had never planned it like that. He was just supposed to be Aztec's boyfriend, but he turned out to be much, much more, and is like he turned out to be one of the most interesting characters also in the book. So that's how it sometimes goes, and
Yeah.
probably most authors can relate to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Some of those characters that are the most fun to write, they just don't seem to want to fade into the background. They demand more attention. And
Yeah, it's
it's
really
always fun.
interesting. It's very interesting how
Yeah,
they can have their own dynamic in your head. Do you sometimes
absolutely.
talk to your characters in your head?
No, not, I wouldn't say I talk to them, but I definitely hear them saying things. So
So do
I don't
they
usually
do you
talk
have
back.
them have conversations with each other in your head?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, you have to some degree because if you're working out a scene, or even if you have them in a situation or you're picturing them in a situation, you've got to imagine them having those conversations and how each character would react specifically to each other in certain situations, right?
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So being an author is you can have voices, hear voices in your head, and not be crazy.
That's right. That's what we tell ourselves, at least, right? We give the voices in our head a platform to speak. That's what we
Yeah.
do. So what can readers expect when they read Space Punks? What kind of emotional impact do you hope to have on them?
So most of all, it's a fun story. It is a lot of action. It has really cool characters, and I think the world is also really exciting. So it's really a fun ride. It will grab you as readers in their reviews say, to like grab you in the first chapter and will just pull you through the whole story. So it's really a fun thing. It's maybe a little bit like Firefly in its whole tone of the story. However, it also turns pretty serious in the end and pretty dramatic. And there is also the characters also have a lot of depth and you know existential questions will be asked and so on. So that's woven into the story. But I think most of all, it's really like a fun action spy mercenary story with a lot of robots and cyborgs.
And so it is the first book in a series, correct?
Yes,
How many books do you have planned in the series?
hopefully many.
Okay. You don't have a set number.
And now, not in this case. In case of Beer and Blue Eyes, it was like always set to be 6 books. So I'm at book 4 now, so I have 2 more to go. it was like always created to be like one story that will be go a full circle in the end. But Space Punks is different. It's not episodic, but it also, I mean, it also has like the big story arc. But it's I hope I can write, maybe 6 books or even more with it if readers like it. That's like always the question, right?
Fun. Yeah. Yep. It definitely is. And so, do you have any other projects on the go, or is this kind of your main project for the foreseeable future?
So I have actually a new series coming out in September. So this year I decided I'm crazy and try to bring out 2 completely new series. But only Space Punks is like completely from the scratch. The other one is a spin-off of Behind Blue Eyes.
Okay.
It's like more like a cyberpunk detective spin-off, but set in the same world, in the same city, and it features 2 side characters from the main series as main characters. So this is of course much easier to write and will be shorter, but I think it will be pretty exciting. So there's a lot of dead people and and yeah, red light district and so on. So I think it will be pretty cool to read. So that's coming out in September. I'm about to finish it. I'm like writing the last 20,000 words now, and then I'll
Okay.
be done.
Perfect. Well, I think this episode will be coming out in September. So, why don't you let our listeners know what the name of that series is, because they might be able to pick it up already or very soon, if not.
Yeah, so the new series title is Neon Nights, and yeah, it will be available everywhere. It's, as I say, a spin-off, but you can read it as a standalone, so you don't have to read Behind Blue Eyes first. But of course, you can, and it's probably more fun. But I would say if someone wants to try something of my books, I would really recommend reading Space Punks, because everyone is telling me that it's my best book, and I think it's really a lot of fun. So if someone wants to read an Anna Mocikat book, try Space Punks before you try something else. Now I'm really mean. I'm like a mom who has a favorite child.
Well, I think it's good too when your latest book is your favorite one, because I think, it's easy to look back and think, you could have written an older book better, and you take a look at your last one, and it's kind of the sum of everything you've learned up to this point as a writer. So
I think we're
it's
getting better as writers, right? I mean,
mm,
that's like from book to book. And in my case, it's like I've been doing this really for a while, and I have a couple of books out, and I was surprised that I'm still capable of getting so much better, which is like the case with Space Punks compared to my previous work. So that's really something encouraging in a way, even if sales are maybe not for a new project, if sales are not as you would wish, but as long as you can say I improved and I'm getting better as a writer, that's the most important thing in my opinion.
yeah, I mean, we definitely want to see, or at least I want to see in my own writing, improvement from book to book. And if I look back and think, yeah, I could have done that one better, but it's only because I've learned since then, and that's definitely a good thing.
Yes, yes. I mean, we are overly critical about our work anyway, right? Especially
Yes.
when it's not published yet. But I think in retrospect, you often see the things you could have done better, and that's how you should learn.
Right. Yes. And it definitely depends on the day too, because sometimes I look at my latest work and I think, what am I doing? Why am I writing?
Yeah, I'm now a little bit nervous with my latest project, because I've never written anything like crime detective thriller. That's
Okay.
that's completely new for me. Of course, it's still cyberpunk, and of course there's cyborgs and so on. But it is a really a new thing for me, very new turf for me. So I'm a bit nervous, and I hope that I can do it well.
Yeah. Well, something for us to look forward to. So Anna, this is the greatest podcast in the multiverse. So can you tell us about how in a parallel universe a different choice might have shaped a different version of your life?
I think many, probably that's something, if you ask this question, everybody will tell you there are many things like that in their lives,
Yeah.
right? Like that have been, um, So probably one of the biggest things in my life that would have turned me to be at a completely different point now than I am now. That was like I think 10 years ago. I was offered a job in one of the biggest publishing houses in Germany, and that was like I met the boss of the publishing house on a party, and we talked about stories, and he was so impressed by my knowledge of story writing and development, and then he offered me a job, and it would have been head of acquisition for science fiction books from the US bought for the
Cool.
German market for this publisher. So it was an incredible job offer, like an incredible career offer, and that was really tough because it was an amazing job with obviously a lot of money and traveling to book fairs and stuff. So it would have been really cool. And I turned this job down because I said, I want to write books. I don't want to go and buy them. I want to write them. And so this
Wow.
is probably like one of the biggest, points in my life where my life probably would have been now in a completely different place than it is. I'm not saying that I regret it, but this is usually most of the things were like I was always going my way in my path and just did the things I wanted to do. But this was like such a big decision. So I sometimes think about that. Yes.
Yeah, definitely. And no, I mean you can't really regret that type of decision because you made that choice and it's obviously worked out well for you and you've been able to enrich the world with your stories. So I think
So
there's a lot of
in a
readers that are
parallel
happy.
universe somewhere, I'm sitting there and would be now considering if I should buy your books for the publisher I'm working with or not and have them translated. So that would be, probably I would be a horrible person and a bitch by now. So because that happens to so many people, who have
Mhm.
like power in this industry. So I won't exclude myself from that. Of course I would like to think that I would still be the same as I am now, but who knows? Maybe I would be like Meryl Streep in The Devil Wears Prada or something like that. I certainly would have
Oh.
the money to buy myself designer shoes, which I don't have now.
uh, well, I'm glad that you stuck with the writing. I think many of us look at a choice like that, especially where you're still in the publishing industry, um, but you're choosing between having a day job like that and your writing career, and I think there's many of us that wonder if we'd stuck with the writing career over the day job, how things would how things would be different. So good for you.
Yeah, it was also so it was not only having a day job. I certainly could have, said I try to write in my free time, even though it would have been a big change because I was a full-time writer before that. But I probably would still have been writing, but there would have been an interest of conflict, which conflict of interest,
Yeah.
which would have been problematic. So I basically would have had to stop writing and publishing unless it would have been under a pen name and starting
Right.
completely over, and certainly not with this publishing house, which was my publisher also. So that was like almost like a decision between completely quitting writing or continuing this journey. And I was just about to get my first book published with this big publisher. So it was like, no, I really want to write books.
Yeah. Wow. Wow. Very cool. Well, thank you so much for joining me today, Anna. Can you tell our listeners how they can find you and where they can purchase your books?
So on Amazon, of course, if you put in Space Bunks, you will find my book. If you put in Behind Blue Eyes, you will find my book. It's easier than my name because my name is a little bit unusual, so it's easier to look by title than my name. But if you want to, connect with me, I'm on Facebook and on Twitter and on Instagram. So that's just I'm the only person with this name. So if you type it in, you will find me immediately and then can connect with me. And ask me detailed questions about my books or not, or just hang out on social media with me.
Awesome. Thank you once again, and I look forward to chatting with you again soon.
Thank you very much. That was a blast. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed my interview with Anna Mocikat. Tune in next week when I sit down with T.A. Bruno. We discuss the subgenre of science fantasy, his background in the film industry, as well as his latest release, Down Below Beyond. Hit the subscribe button so that you don't miss it. I can't wait to see you next week. Bye now. Thank you for joining me. If you enjoyed the show, like and subscribe on your favorite podcast app or on YouTube. You can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Greatest Podcast in the Multiverse. As well, you can help support the show by supporting me on Patreon. For as little as $5 a month, you can get early access to the show, as well as submit your questions for my upcoming guests. I hope to see you next time. Bye now.